Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Olivia Powis. Olivia is the CEO of Carbon Capture and Storage Association. Olivia, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
I'm Olivia Powis, so I'm Chief Executive of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. We are the lead European trade association for the commercial deployment of carbon capture and storage.
Okay, so how did you get started off in your career then?
I didn't start out in carbon capture. I started out in a local government fast-track trainee graduate programme and ended up from that in social housing, and so worked for the National Housing Federation, which was trade association. So that was after I moved out of government and worked for the trade association in social housing. And it was just at the beginning of deployment of renewables. And so my role sort of expanded into then making sure that housing associations and their tenants could actually benefit from fitting solar panels onto the roofs of social tenants. And so I did a lot of work there and sort of joint advocacy work with the renewables industry. And from there, I then moved into energy. So I did that for a few years and then went to Ofgem, worked in energy regulation for 7-8 years, and then National Infrastructure Commission on long-term sort of infrastructure planning, and then came back into trade associations. I'd enjoyed working at the beginning of a new industry and that sort of excitement of establishing a new industry and getting it off the ground in something that I believed in. And so carbon capture was the next exciting thing that we were sort of talking about at the Infrastructure Commission, looking at greenhouse gas removals. So I moved it back to the trade association function to look to deploy carbon capture. And I joined right at the beginning of this phase, I suppose, of deploying carbon capture in the UK. So it was Boris Johnson had just announced his 10-point plan and commitment to deploy 4 CCUS clusters. And that was the point I joined the CCSA about 4.5 years ago.
Okay. It's a bit of a huge change in career. What made you go into the government in the first place?
That was right at the beginning of my career.
Yeah.
I mean, I was applying for graduate trainee programs, and that was the first year that they'd set up that program. And actually, the alumni is quite interesting. We've all gone off and done different things, but I was very much interested in social policy at that point, and social and environmental policy. They were both. That was kind of my driving force. And I suppose this was around, and this still touches on it because it's still around equality for people. I think addressing climate change is really about how do we make sure that we are providing these solutions for everyone effectively, and how can we make sure that, and we can come on to talk about it, I'm sure, but for carbon capture, it has that additional role. So it is absolutely about decarbonising, but it's also about protecting jobs, protecting industries, and particularly in the UK, that's in our industrial areas and to prevent them from deindustrialization. So it was always, I think, what I initially went into is still partly there for where we are now in carbon capture, in climate change as well.
Because you've had quite a varied career, quite an amazing career, actually. So why go into the carbon capture now?
I think because of having worked at the beginning of renewables and the establishment of the feed-in tariff in the UK, I enjoyed working with that sector. I think the drive and the ambition of the people involved, the challenge in sort of setting up new industries and making sure that they can be deployed was really interesting, I suppose. And then when moving into Ofgem and looking at the regulation and all the structures that sit behind having to do that, so regulation and legislation, was super interesting. And so carbon capture, this, again, an industry that's, well, it's not a new industry, but it's a new industry to be deployed at scale. And what we've done over the last 4 years, or since I've been here, is really establish that regulatory and legislative framework. So it's how do we know the technology's there, how do we make sure we can actually deploy the technology and deliver it and make projects actually happen and drive them forward. And so I think the real attraction for me was being able to do it in another new industry, which I believed in and has a core purpose, and being able to, it very much feels like you're part of a community, I think, in doing that. The CCUS, the carbon capture and storage industry, is very determined and resilient in terms of driving forward to make sure that this industry is deployed. And that's an enjoyable environment, I think, to work in as well, with people who really believe in what they're doing.
I do think so as well. Do you think that the carbon capture will have a big impact in the UK?
Definitely. I mean, we've now seen this year, there have been 5 final investment decisions. So we've got 5 projects underway. So 2 transport and storage projects, one in Northwest Liverpool Bay as part of HyNet Cluster, and one Northern Endurance Partnership on the East Coast as part of the Teesside as part of the East Coast Cluster. And then the first projects have also taken final investment decisions to connect to those. So Net Zero Teesside on the East Coast, a new gas power station with CCS, and Heidelberg cement plant in the Northwest in Wales, and also in Cyclus's energy from waste plant. And so they're just the first ones, but these are in areas with industries where people are working already. They're potentially facing deindustrialization. They've got to look to the future. They know they will have to decarbonize. And so carbon capture is revitalizing those industries. It's enabling them to have a future here in the UK. It keeps people in jobs. It promotes economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it'll have a huge impact if we can deploy it at the scale that we need to. I mean, we estimate it at the Carbon Capture and Storage Association that the additional income to the UK government and the Treasury is significant because it's keeping these industries going. It's selling the products, it's exporting them, and we estimate it could be up to 26 billion by 2030 and up to 94 billion GVA by 2050. So these are big numbers. These are big industries, and they will have a big impact.
Other than the projects that you've mentioned, is there going to be any more projects coming up in the future?
Yes. I mean, we did, as part of our role as the trade association, we've looked at all the projects in the pipeline in terms of those developing, and we're just actually about to release our next updated delivery plan. We've done 2 versions of this previously, and we're just doing the next one. And there are over 100 projects still in the pipeline. So 100 projects across the UK looking at deploying carbon capture. So there's huge potential, and between them, capturing and storing over 70 million tonnes of CO2 per year. So we know there's this huge pipeline of projects, and the government have committed to the next 2 clusters in terms of there's Viking CCS in Humber and the Acorn project in Scotland. And these are the next 2 that they had flagged in the original cluster sequencing process. And those have now received some DevEx funding in the last spending review with a view to taking final investment decision this Parliament. There's also Peat Cluster, which is a group of cement plants in the Peat District and Morecambe Net Zero. And they've received investment from the National Wealth Fund, and as well are looking at taking a final investment decision this Parliament. So there are a number of projects. And there are also lots of others all across the UK, others in South Wales, South East. There are projects that are all looking to deploy carbon capture. So these first ones are just the beginning. We expect there to be many more coming down the pipeline. And we know we've got to do it quite quickly. If we're going to meet our carbon budgets, we've got to move quickly to ensure that we meet our deadlines by 2035 and then 2050.
Do you think that we will meet our deadlines?
Yes. It's challenging. We have really got to keep moving, and we've got to keep moving fast, and we've got to deploy at scale, and we've got to make sure that we're learning from each of those projects and progressing quickly. But we know that there are sufficient projects there. We know we've got enough storage capacity. The UK's got a third of Europe's potential geological storage capacity. So we've got far more storage than we need for our domestic emissions. And we've also have all these projects across the UK that are looking to deploy carbon capture and storage. So the ingredients are all there. We now have to actually make it happen and progress and get the next projects underway. And that's what we're focusing at the moment on. We need to, we're working with industry and also engaging with government as how can we get the mechanisms in place to make sure that we can give all those projects a route to market so that they can continue to move forward. And part of that is making sure that we have a route forward that will transition away from subsidy as well. So we've got to be able to move the industry from a point where we need subsidy to deploy those first projects, as we've seen with offshore wind and other new technologies that have developed in the UK and globally over the last few years. And so it's how do we move the industry from that point to a point where it can be self-sustaining.
Do you sometimes feel that the projects aren't moving as quickly as you hoped? And what are the blockers in that?
Yeah, I mean, they aren't moving as quickly as we'd hoped. A lot of them have been facing significant delays. I think, to be blunt, the change in political upheaval over the last few years, so since we started this clustered sequencing program, and Boris Johnson was Prime Minister at that point. So take it from there to where we are now, there's been significant upheaval and change, and that has slowed down government decision-making, undoubtedly, and made it quite difficult. So there have been many points during those years where we were pushing and waiting for decisions to be made to be able to move forward. I mean, there has been significant progress this year in achieving those final investment decisions, but there are a lot of projects that are still waiting and spending a lot of DevEx that need a clear route forward and need to be able to progress. So it has been slow. It's been slower, I think, than anyone would have liked, but those first ones will always be the slowest, and we would hope that would speed up. I mean, we need a sort of continual route, as they've had for offshore wind, that there's constant regular allocation rounds to signal to industry that there will be future opportunities to move forward. And this is what we've been calling for a number of years.
Do you think that this will make the UK a world leader in carbon capture?
Yeah, I mean, we are in a really good position. There are, I think, 66 projects, globally now, or perhaps it's just over 70 actually, global projects and operational. And so the industry is moving forward, but there are a huge amount of projects in development globally. And so I think the UK has made a huge amount of progress in terms of developing that regulatory and legal framework. We have successfully managed to develop business models that are investable, attracted private sector investment into them, and being able to progress. So there are other projects that are happening elsewhere, but I think the UK's models there are really world leading, and we've focused on this having clusters to move forward. So groups of industries together, sharing the infrastructure, sharing pipeline and storage infrastructure. Now looking forward, moving to non-pipeline transport as well, like ship, road and rail. And so we've made a huge amount of progress there. We also have the expertise in terms of the subsurface. From our oil and gas expertise, we've got the people who know and understand the subsurface, know how to use the technology and how to make it work. And we've also got the heavy industries that need decarbonising. So we have all the elements here, and we have invested. Our universities are also very good in terms of leading on innovation and technological development. So everything is there. It's whether we can now continue to move quickly enough to we have developed well, but we need to move quickly because we know that there are other regions globally that are now really looking to deploy. There's quite a lot of activity in China, Middle East, North America and Canada have already sort of been developing projects for a number of years and will continue to do so. Norway has been doing it for almost 30 years and is continuing to develop. So There are, and we're increasingly actually seeing activity across Europe now, Denmark, Netherlands, France, Italy, Germany recently sort of amended legislation. So they are now able to move forward with this industry. So a lot of activity. And if the UK wants to lead, we've got to continue to move quickly and maximise those opportunities.
You were saying that we have the necessary skills for people to work on the carbon capture storage projects. Do you think that a lot of the skills are going to be transferable from other industries?
Yes, absolutely. And this is why, again, it's a really key opportunity, because we do have that knowledge and skills. And if we can transition and manage that transition, then we can move people across. And of course, there are some elements they need to learn and be trained in, but really they're very, very transferable skills. And so that's both in subsurface, but also in the industries that we're looking to decarbonise. So yeah, there's a huge opportunity in terms of the energy transition and transitioning those jobs and skills over. But we've got to manage it well and make sure that we don't lose those skills and people before we have the projects ready and for them to move over.
Because how do you mean you don't lose those skills? Can you elaborate on that?
I mean, sort of being specific with perhaps for the subsurface, we're kind of talking about skills like drilling, subsurface geology, reservoir modelling, pipeline engineering, offshore operations, safety. They're all directly transferable over. And so we need to make sure that the oil and gas industry essentially can then transition those workers over into the workforce that we need for CCUS. And so that's making sure that there's clear alignment in terms of timescales, and that, we've seen a number of industrial closures as well over the last few months. And what we want to make sure is that we don't lose people with expertise working in industries, both in offshore, but also in industries like refineries and things that we're looking to decarbonise, and how we can make sure that we have kept that knowledge and the people that are working there before they've offshored and moved somewhere else to go and find a job elsewhere. So managing that transition is something that the government has got to quite carefully make sure that those milestones all sort of align and that there is a clear transition pathway.
Okay, because how are you going to manage that skills then? Because there is the temptation that if they are maybe not in work just now, that they could get a job offer abroad and maybe just go there, and then there wouldn't be. How is the government, and how are you going to resolve that?
I mean, we're working with government through their Green Jobs Delivery Plan, and also with, and that's alongside industry, and it's alongside with other trade associations as well. So it's cross sector, and there is a lot of work there in terms of how we can make sure people are both aware of the opportunities that are coming down the line, what they will need to do, and what types of jobs they are for them to be able to do that, and enabling sort of skills passporting, skills training to come into play as and when required. So there is a lot of work going on there, but it's the key thing that we have to be able to offer is to know that the jobs will be there at the end of it. So there's got to be, there's a lot of work going into engaging with a future workforce and training programs, but we then have to have the certainty that those jobs will be there and these projects will be built and the industry will move forward at the timescales that we want it to, and have the ambition for it to do that.
So you did touch earlier on in governmental policy about moving forward with renewables. What else is coming up that could maybe give some people some hope that are maybe not working, that there could be work for them in the future?
The government has set out that there is this ambition for this programme. The industry is there ready to deploy. Carbon Budget 7 was published earlier this year, and the Carbon Budget Delivery Plan was also published. And all of these set out that CCUS is an essential technology and that we have to have it if we are to meet our carbon budgets and if we are to decarbonise our industry. So, from the top level, there is that ambition there. The industry is ready to deploy. And I think a lot of what we have to do as well is around the role that the industry can play is making sure that we're driving forward the projects, that we are ready to move forward as soon as the frameworks are in place and that there are opportunities to do that, that we're looking at those markets to drive the industry forward. So for example, a lot of CO2 storage developers are looking at the opportunities for exporting that storage. So engaging with European emitters for the potential to transport and store CO2 from European emitters and store it in UK stores. So looking at opportunities to do that and removing the barriers to do that, developing the types of markets that we need to develop. So low carbon products markets. So if a cement plant can decarbonise with carbon capture and storage, it can produce low carbon or zero carbon cement. And then that can then be used by either sort of public programs or private developers who are developing new infrastructure or building schools, hospitals, football stadiums, whatever it is, and can then look to procure that low carbon cement. So a lot of what we're doing is about driving forward those markets to make sure that there is an opportunity for this and that also there will be different revenue streams to make sure that, this is an industry that will ultimately need to pay for itself and the market will be able to drive that forward. So all of this sort of requires a lot of communication and engagement with different players. And I think making sure that as many people are aware of the industry, what the opportunities it can bring, what it will do is also a key area where we need to focus our efforts and make sure that as part of that, then people do understand the opportunities that it will bring and, the economic growth, jobs, etc., and all of that in terms of how they can be involved and what it's for.
Okay, but I think a lot of people I've spoken to recently, they are concerned that maybe that they would need to go back to maybe college or university or take some training to work in the carbon capture projects. Is that viable? Is that even true? Do you think it's going to be easier to not retrain, or do you think they would even have to retrain?
It's a very complicated industry in terms of the value chain. So there are jobs in the capture side. So there are jobs in the industries like the cement plant, the fertilizer plants, etc., that need to capture the CO2. So there are jobs there. Then there are jobs in the transportation of the CO2 and jobs involved in the storage of the CO2, and then all the jobs around it. So the people who are developing the capture technologies. And then when building the capture plant, or if some of these are on new plants, it's all the construction workers as well that are all involved in that. And also for the CO2 stores. So it's the jobs there. And then there are additional roles around, there's a increasing awareness of the opportunities for AI and there for sort of CO2 transport and storage and the types of sort of interdisciplinary problem solving that will need to address some of these big issues of getting these big industries underway. So it's a whole, these engineering jobs, they are construction jobs, they are subsurface jobs, and they are sort of the jobs around project management and making these projects happen as well. So there's a whole broad range, and I think calling, however we choose to group them or whatever we refer to them as, it's actually, we're talking about a very diverse set of skills and jobs here. But many of them, they're not a big divergence from the job that they originated from. So if you work in a cement plant, it's still working in a cement plant and there's a capture unit attached to that. So there isn't a whole sort of massive reskilling of this, or if we have a shortage of welders, a welder is a welder. There are programs to train up welders and to have that sort of expertise, but they're not massively different from other jobs in sort of big construction and infrastructure. So a lot of them are the same. A lot of them will be the same teams that will be building big nuclear programs that will also be building large carbon capture and storage programs. So it's a big umbrella, I think, of jobs. And so within that, a significant number of opportunities, but within a very sort of diverse set of skills across that.
So, for a younger audience, what is carbon capture? I'm pretty sure they would all know, but what is carbon capture?
So carbon capture is, we refer to it as carbon capture, utilization and storage. It's a low carbon technology that captures carbon dioxide, so CO2 emissions from industrial facilities. And these are things such as power generation, chemical plants, cement plants, fertilizers and refining, and then transports it by pipeline or ship or road or rail for safe and permanent storage deep below the seabed, so in geological subsurface below the seabed, and it either stores it there permanently or uses it in utilization, so in products where it is then kept within that product for a long time. So it's a technology to remove CO2 from the atmosphere that would otherwise go there and make sure we take it out of the atmosphere permanently. There are also technologies that are removal programs, so they take more of the CO2 out of the atmosphere. So this can be something like direct air capture or bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And these create a sort of negative carbon credit. So they take out more CO2 from the atmosphere than was originally there, and then store it again in perpetuity.
Okay, but that can revolutionize not just the oil and gas industry, but all industries across the UK.
Yeah. I mean, this gives we know we have to decarbonise our industries. I mean, we have net zero in legislation in the UK, and we know that we've got to decarbonise. We've just had COP30 in Belém, and in the globally, we've got to make progress on this, and we've got to decarbonise all our heavy industries. And so in the UK, we've got quite a significant industrial base. And so this carbon capture and storage provides an opportunity for these industries to revitalise and have a route forwards, and to enable them to produce low carbon products and compete on a global scale, and gives them an opportunity to do that in the UK rather than offshoring. So rather than having to either close down or move somewhere else to access low carbon infrastructure, they can do that in the UK and then lead the market from here.
So, what is your advice that you would give to any young graduate leaving university on how to enter into the carbon capture projects?
I would say have a look at our website, CTSO's website, and have a look at the number of projects that we've got across the UK and then also across Europe, and the companies, and look at our members, the companies that are involved in this, and approach them. But there will be significant opportunities. The areas we map on our website, and there's a map featuring all the projects. So we look at where we're looking to deploy and the companies involved in each of those. And, I think come to webinars, conferences, events, and find out a bit more about it as a graduate. If that's something that people are interested in, then come and find out what it's about, where the opportunities are, and the companies involved. There are all types of apprenticeship programs being offered, and then obviously roles within our member companies as well, who are looking to deploy, and the projects that are now moving into construction, they themselves are then have specific opportunities there to move forward. So a wide variety of opportunities depending on what it is that people are, what part of the industry that people are interested in.
So they need to do their research before they know what projects are going to be available.
I think it would be knowing what part of the value chain that they're interested in. So are they a geologist looking at the CO2 storage particularly, and then it's engaging with that part of the industry, or if they're involved in construction, then it's looking at the projects that will be moving towards that. If they're a chemical engineer and they're looking at the capture processes, for example, then that's another area. And so yes, it depends. I think knowing what part of the industry that they're particularly interested in That's the key thing. And then find out which companies and where the opportunities are. But we have all of that set out on our website. So quite easy to navigate in terms of identifying which companies are involved, where the opportunities are, and just attending, the sort of CCUS 101 type webinars just to find out a bit more about it. But it may be that people are looking for an apprenticeship, in something, and then it's very much focused on particular projects and companies that are offering that, and there are a number underway, and they're really good opportunities for school leavers, perhaps, rather than university graduates, to look at and see what the opportunities are for them in their local areas.
Yeah, because it's interesting because these would be long-term, ongoing projects. Even they would take quite a few years to complete. So there is a lot of companies that opt to undertake construction abroad. Do you think that in construction for these projects will take place in the UK?
The industry has worked hard and we put in a voluntary commitment to over 50% local content for the industry, and that's something that the first projects have been successful in terms of meeting those targets. So yes, as far as possible. I mean, there are obviously areas where the UK need to invest in our supply chain and make sure that we're able to supply each part of the projects and each part of the value chain there. So of course there will be some areas where we will be going, at the moment those projects will have to look overseas because it's just not possible to procure those parts of the supply chain in the UK. And also for the government, I think, to understand what it takes to do that. And sometimes the UK is not always the most competitive. And if we want to target UK industries, then we have to help them be able to be competitive within that and to be part of that. So a lot of work ongoing there at the moment, but it's something that we as the industry drove ourselves to have a commitment to a 50% local content across our projects, because we feel really strongly it's something that we have to, the benefit of establishing these projects is not only to protect those industries, to give them a new route forward and to revitalise them, but particularly in the supply chain to be able to supply those projects from UK companies and local companies.
Okay. I think I'm going to end the conversation there. I think I was just going to ask you, if you could turn back time, would you change anything about your career?
I don't think I would, actually. I don't think I would. Sorry. I haven't got a kind of clear... No, I don't think there is anything. I think each bit has been quite interesting to kind of get me to where I am. And this is a really interesting job. So it's a very interesting and varied job and challenging.
I'm pretty sure it would be. I'm pretty sure it would be very challenging. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Olivia for her time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening and see you next week.